Hello and welcome to lesson 3 of 2.8 Finance, which is analysing how different interest rates affect the levels of saving, borrowing and investment. So in terms of the syllabus, we're looking at the fourth objective here because actually the third one is one that we should really do at the end of the course. It makes more sense to learn it in that order. So we've jumped now into our fourth bullet, which is to analyse how different interest rates affect the levels of saving, borrowing and investment. Now, before we go any further on this topic, it's really important to understand the meaning of saving and investment to an economist because it means something different to what it might mean either in finance or just in common parlance, in common speech, if we're just talking normally, as opposed to in economics about this kind of thing. So, saving to an economist is deferred spending. Any money that is not spent is saved. So we tend to think of saving as when we deposit money in a bank, and that is saving. And this indeed is saving, but it's important to realize that any money that is not spent in economics is counted as saving. Investment to an economist means something different to what it would normally mean in common parlance. So investment is the purchase of capital goods by businesses and also by government that are used to produce goods and services in the future. So if a car manufacturer buys a robot for the car assembly line, that is investment because you're buying a robot today, which is going to be used to produce the car in the future. So investment is when businesses and government buy capital goods. It tends to be the case, in economics at least, that investment is done by businesses as well as government, and saving is done by households. Businesses will save as well, but generally in questions in the economics exam, when we're talking about saving, we tend to be looking in the context of households. When we talk about investment, we tend to be looking in the context of businesses. So that's one fairly blunt distinction or blunt way to distinguish the two. In common parlance, if we're talking about buying things like shares, we often use the phrase investment, investing in shares. That is financial investment, and it's not the same as investment here. So be really, really careful in economics about using the term investment. Okay, you should only really, in economics, be using the term investment when we talk about businesses or government buying capital goods. So what is the interest rate? What do we actually mean by the term interest rate? We've heard it already in some previous lessons, but what exactly is it? It's actually two things. The first thing to understand about the interest rate is that it is the cost of borrowing. So if we take an example of taking out a loan to buy a car, let's say we take out a £10,000 car loan, so we borrow £10,000 to buy our car, at a simple interest rate of 5% per year. So 5% means 5 out of 100. 5% means 5 out of 100. So to calculate the amount we have to pay back each year, if we take out a £10,000 loan, is we multiply by 0.05. So we pay back interest of 0.05 times £10,000, which equals £500 per year. So that's 0.05 times 10,000 or 5 divided by 100 times £10,000. We get the same answer, £500 per year. It's important to note as well there that we're dealing with simple interest. There's no compound interest in the GCSE economics exam. You'll only ever be dealing with simple interest. Now, a really important point, which is going to be really important for the second part of this lesson, because interest is what we pay for the privilege of buying now and paying later, the interest rate is the price of money. So we've looked at prices earlier in the course, and students often get confused on this, confused between the interest rate and the inflation rate. The interest rate is the price of money, not the inflation rate. In this example, the price we pay for borrowing £10,000 today and not having to pay it back until sometime in the future, that is £5,000 per year. The price we are paying to have that £10,000 today is £500 per year. So the interest rate is the price of money. The other dimension to the interest rate is the return on saving money. So it's the income we receive when we save money. So let's say we have a savings account, and if the bank is offering us 2% per year on our savings account, then if we save £1,000, this is earning us £20 of interest per year. So £20 interest per year, because it's 1,000 multiplied by 2 out of 100, or 0.02, which means we're earning £20 interest per year in this example. So now we're going to look at the impact of changes in interest rates on saving, borrowing, and investment, and we're going to build up a demand and supply model similar to what you've seen earlier in the course. So we're going to start with demand. So here we have the demand for money. Now, a demand curve, as you know, has the price on the y-axis and the quantity demanded on the x-axis. So it's the same in this case. The x-axis is quantity, but as we've just seen, the price of money is the interest rate. So we have the interest rate on the y-axis, the price of money. Now, suppose that the current interest rate is 5%. And if the current interest rate is 5%, then the demand for money is represented by Q1 on the diagram. Now, if we have a fall in the interest rate to 3%, what happens to the demand for money? Well, we've seen that the interest rate is the cost of borrowing. So, ceteris paribus, all other things being equal, if there is a fall in the cost of borrowing, then there will be a rise in the demand for borrowed money. So there will be an expansion in the quantity demanded from Q1 to Q2 if there is a fall in the interest rate from 5% to 3%. So a fall in the interest rate leads to a fall in the cost of borrowing. And to express this in the terms of economists, we could say also there is a fall in the return on saving, which means a fall in the opportunity cost of spending. The opportunity cost of spending is the benefit foregone from saving that money. So the return on saving goes down, means the opportunity cost of spending goes down. So if the return on saving goes down and the cost of borrowing goes down, we will get a rise in the quantity of money borrowed. There will be a rise in demand for money. The reverse is also true. If we get a rise in the interest rate, that raises the cost of borrowing, and so there will be a fall in the quantity of money borrowed. And so we see that the demand curve for money, at GCSE at least, is sloped in exactly the same way as other demand curves that you've seen in other markets. We have a downward sloping demand curve for money. The demand for money is downward sloping. So a fall in the price of money, a fall in the interest rate, we'll see a rise in the quantity of money borrowed. A rise in the interest rate, we will see a fall in the quantity of money borrowed. Now, if we take investment as another example, we've looked at borrowing there, but here, if we're looking at investment, we have already defined investment as spending by businesses on capital goods. Okay, so investment is spending by businesses. And for businesses, just like households, they will have a choice between spending money and saving money. So if we get a fall in the interest rate, then say from 5% to 3%, again, there will be a rise in the quantity of investment demand because it's the same thought process as for households. So a fall in the interest rate will lead to a fall in the cost of borrowing and a fall in the opportunity cost of spending for both businesses and consumers. So that means that businesses are going to invest more. They're going to spend more and they're going to save less, just like for households. Now, because households are going to be spending more money, that too will cause a rise in investment by businesses. So if you are a car manufacturer and interest rates go down, then for the car manufacturer, there is a fall in the cost of borrowing and a fall in the opportunity cost of spending. So the car manufacturer will be induced to borrow more money and save less money. But consumers are going to borrow more money and buy more cars. And if consumers are buying more cars, then that is going to mean that businesses might want to invest in more capacity in order to produce more cars to satisfy that extra demand. So both the fact that the cost of borrowing falls for both businesses and consumers together is going to lead to a rise in investment spending by firms. So as we had for borrowing, we will have a downward sloping investment demand curve there. Now, in order to look at the impact of the change in interest rates on saving, we need to look at the savings schedule. So this is the supply side of our demand and supply model. So again, interest rate on the y-axis, quantity on the x-axis. So if we have a 5% interest rate, this is associated with the quantity of saving Q1 on our diagram. Now, if the interest rates go up, let's say to 8%, that is going to cause a rise in savings. So that is going to actually raise the supply of loanable funds into the banking system. So the supply side is the savings side. The amount of money that is able to be borrowed, we call in economics loanable funds. So funds that can be loaned out. And you can only lend out money if there is a supply of money. So if there is a rise in the interest rate, this will cause a rise in savings, and so an expansion along the supply curve of loanable funds. So there will be a rise in saving there, movement, an expansion along the supply schedule. And similarly, if there is a fall in interest rates from 8% to 5%, we will get a fall in the amount that is saved by both households and businesses from Q2 to Q1. So just to go through this, if there is a rise in the interest rate, this will lead to a rise in the return on saving and a rise in the cost of borrowing. So this will lead to both households and businesses choosing to save more. So we'll get an expansion along the supply schedule, the savings schedule. Now it's time to put the two together to see the interaction of demand and supply in the money market. So the equilibrium interest rate in the market would be determined in the same way as prices are determined in other markets, so by the interaction of demand and supply. So hopefully you're familiar by now with how markets work and that the price and quantity would be determined at the equilibrium. I should say that this is not exactly the same as the Bank of England's interest rate. The Bank of England's interest rate is set by the Bank of England itself. This is the money market interest rate. So this is the interest rate that you might have, for example, on a savings account if you go to your bank, or the rate on loans if you go out and get a loan. This is the market rate. This is the rate that you actually pay if you get a loan, or that you actually receive if you have a savings account. This is the money market interest rate. So in this example, the money market is in equilibrium at 3% interest rate with a quantity traded of Q1. Now, if there is a rise in either investment or borrowing, which is caused by something other than a change in the interest rates, then the demand curve will shift. So let's say the economy is in a boom, and this leads to a big rise in investment spending by firms. Lots and lots of firms are buying lots and lots of machines in order to produce more and more goods and services. The example we used earlier was a car manufacturer. So if lots of car manufacturers are buying lots of robots because they think they're going to sell more cars, then they will demand more loanable funds, and that will shift the demand curve from D1 to D2. And the same way that a rise in demand for Mars bars causes a rise in the price of Mars bars, the same is the case here in the money market. So a rise in investment by firms from D1 to D2 will cause a rise in the interest rate, in this case from 3% to 5%, and a rise in the quantity traded from Q1 to Q2. So anything that causes a change in investment other than a change in the interest rate will cause the demand curve to shift, and that will raise the interest rate. So a rise in demand causes a rise in the interest rate, and the reverse is also true. A fall in demand will cause a fall. So let's take the supply side. If there is a rise in saving for some reason, let's say the economy goes into recession and people are worried about the future, maybe they're worried about their future incomes, then they may decide to save more regardless of interest rates. In this case, the supply schedule will shift. So if there is a rise in saving, supply will shift to the right from S1 to S2, and this will cause a fall in the interest rate, in this case from 5% to 3%, and a rise in the quantity traded. So a rise in saving will lead to a fall in the interest rate, and the reverse is also true. A fall in saving will lead to a rise in the interest rate. So you will need to spend a bit of time talking yourselves through the diagrams. This is a summary here of the key points. But the important thing to realize is that the market works in exactly the same way as other markets you've looked at. So as far as we're concerned on the syllabus, and as far as the analysis here is concerned, the money market works in the same way as the market for bananas. So if you understand demand and supply, it shouldn't be too difficult to get your head around how the money market works. Have a read through the summary of key points. Try the questions on the next slide, and I will see you for the next lesson.